Hi, my name's Dylan, and this is the first video for my blog Polykinema. In this video I'm going to be going through the process of modeling a high poly asset for a game or for film, and I'm going to be creating a base mesh in Maya and then taking that base mesh over to Mudbox to add in some nice high-res detail and start working on the textures. And by the end I want to end up with something that's got a really nice level of detail and some nice surface textures like in these reference photos. So I'm going to jump over to Maya, get started. Okay, so the first thing that I want to do is set up an image plane to work from, and I'm going to use polygon planes because I find the image planes attached to the camera a little bit cumbersome. So I'll just go into the channel editor, and in the construction history it's got the creation node. I'm going to set the width and the height to the values I know will correspond to the reference image I have. Now I want to get this out of the way, so I've got some space to model. Place it vertically, and then place the bottom in line with the world origin. So we use the origin of the scene as the ground plane for the model. I just want to attach a new material, and I'll use the Lambert shader. So I'm going to put a file node into the color channel and use this set of 4 shapes that I created for that side view image plane. I hit 6, that'll bring up texture shaded, and I'll be able to see the texture applied to the image plane. I got to adjust the UVs so only this leftmost image is showing. I'm just going to jump over to the UV texture editor. In edit UVs, I'm going to grab those right 2 UVs, and I can set their values up here to 0.25, and that'll set it so it only encompasses that left quarter. And I'm going to delete the history on that object, freeze transformations, and just pressing insert to bring up the pivot. I'm going to snap that back to the scene origin and quickly save, and Control D to duplicate. I can just rotate that around so that I have a front and side image plane to work off. If I press 6 in the front and side, I can see both of those reference images sitting behind the grid. I also want to create another image plane for the top view using a polygon plane. This top view is construction reference, so it's got the width here. This circle represents the overall width of the widest part, the waist of the jar. And then these circles are for a triangular element that I'm going to create just to give the shape of the jar a little bit of a taper towards the base into this triangle. Break up the design a little bit, make it a bit more visually interesting. If I just attach that, that should come straight in, no problems. And I can drop it down below the grid so I can see it in the perspective view after I've started modeling. Last thing I want to do with these planes is just add them in a new visibility layer called reference planes, and set the display type to reference so they can't be selected in the viewport. So I'm going to start modeling the basic shapes for the jar, starting with this base triangular shape It's made up of 3 cylinders and then a section of a 4th cylinder that's repeated around, bridging in between them. So I'll make these smaller cylinders first, and I can line them up in the top view in X-ray mode, and just line them up with those central points I've got there in the reference image. I'm going to drop the radius down to about 7.5 and increase the subdivision axes, subdivisions around the axis, to give me a bit more resolution along that transition, because we're only going to be using a small section of the curve before it meets up with this larger radius. And I want to put a vertice or an edge right on that apex there. So I want to create those other two. So I'm just going to duplicate and then set the pivot by pressing insert, snapping it to the scene origin. I can set the rotation on that to bring it right round for that even distribution, and that's going to be 120 degrees. This one will be 240. And with those two in place, I can grab this original one, which still has the construction history. If I duplicate it again, and holding down Shift, drag select over it, I'm going to swap the selection back to the original from the duplication. Grabbing that construction history again, I can drag that radius out until it lines up with those curves. Now I want to avoid having a divot where they meet up here, so I'm going to have it 22 units for the radius. I'm going to increase the subdivisions again, looking for enough resolution that the curve is apparent, but not too much that it gets difficult to create clean geometry with. Maybe a that's looking okay. Now I want to delete the top and bottom faces of this so I can just keep the outer ring. And I only want these faces from the whole cylinder. So I'll invert the selection and I'll delete these two end faces so I can bridge up after the shapes have been combined. So I'm going to freeze transformations on this object and delete the history. I want to put the pivot back into the scene origin so that when I duplicate I can rotate it around the central axis. I can freeze the transformations on these 3 cylinders as well. Delete the history and combine them, and take the top and bottom set of faces off those as well as the intersecting geometry in the center here. Take it right back, leaving only these end faces here, so there's about 4. To either side of the central one. that look right? Yep. So now I can take these individual shapes, combine them, freeze transformations, and delete history. And then I'm going to bridge these polygons to fill that gap. I can just go to Edit Mesh, Bridge, and then I can just hit the G key to redo that action for each of these edge selections. Create polygon primitive cylinder and set it to 30. So you can see when it comes to merging these shapes, I'll be able to match up the geometry very evenly. Now I'm going to lift that up so it sits right here around the waist of the jar, and I'm going to use the radius on the construction history to bring that out. Looks like 28.5 centimeters would work well for that one. And a height of 10 I think corresponds nicely to the shape there. It starts turning after that. With this lower shape, I'm going to use the move tools on these vertices to line them up with the base of the object. Now I'm going to take this base shape and I'm going to repeat it for the spout. I also want that to be triangular. Center pivot. Now that's going to put it slightly off axis, so I've just got to snap that back to the scene center as well. And then with the scale tool, I can line that up so it fits nicely in along that edge there. And scale it for the length of that spout. Use the vertex tool to snap them to the grid up there, and I just got to eyeball the alignment for this, the base of the spout. That looks pretty good. I'm going to keep these shapes oriented in the same direction to keep the form looking pretty consistent. The next thing I want to do is just duplicate this again for the tip of the spout. Line it up by eye. Okay, so I want to get rid of these top and bottom faces, and I want to use this shape to create a curve to use for a loft operation. So if I go modify, convert polygon edges to curve, I'll use periodic and cubic, and that'll create a curve that matches those polygon edges exactly. I'm going to do the same for this shape. to create the triangular form, I can just press G, give me the same result. Click save. Now I'm going to turn off polygon selection up here, so I can just grab these two curves. I'm going to loft between them. Surfaces loft, and bring up the options box. I'm going to create 2 section spans, leave it as cubic, and set the output geometry to polygons, matching the control points. If I hit loft now, the geometry is going to be twisted around. I can grab that curve, this curve, I don't want to change that triangular base, and rotate it so that it's lined up a little bit more evenly. Now it's still twisting around, so I might have to find a slightly more optimal angle. Okay, for this shape, we want it to have a bit more of a curve rather than a linear taper to it. So I'm going to scale these edge loops out to match that shape a bit better. Now, the center of the scale tool, the pivot for the scale tool, is going to be slightly off axis, off center, because of the irregular geometry. I've just got to snap it back to the center of the scene axis, scene origin, sorry, and I'll put it down at the base just so I can see where it is, remember where it is. I'm going to hit this pin modifier, pin handle, and that'll lock the scale tool to the world origin while I'm working, so I won't have to keep adjusting it. Now to keep these lined up in the same spot, I'm going to hold down Control and scale the other 2 axes, and I want to line it up using the side view, the front view, for each of these curves. Just going off one of the edges because the other one won't quite match. It's not quite enough geometry, so I'm going to insert a couple of edge loops. And it's just set to 1 using multiple edge loops, which divides it quite evenly in the center. And you'll see if I select the scale tool again, it will jump back to the origin. Just tweak these slightly to keep that curve flowing. I might move this down slightly. Now if I have a look in the perspective view, you can see it's got a nice curved taper coming to 3 points, the edges of that triangular form. And I want to do the same for this shape up the top here. So create a curve by going Modify, Convert, Polygon Edges to Curve. Do the same for the bottom of the spout, just hit G. Turn off select polygons so that I can grab those 2 curves and do a loft. And now I want to rotate that back around to make the geometry nice and evenly radiating around. If I have a look at the top view, I'll turn on wireframe unshaded. That looks quite nicely lined up. I'll just have a look in the channel box. See if I can get it pretty close to exact. I don't think I'm going to get it perfect. Have a look at the top view. That's pretty close. And I'm going to do the same shape alterations to match that rounded shape of the top of the vessel there. And I'll do it in the side view again. Now, the scale tool is still down here at the scene origin, and holding down Control I can scale those edge loops to match the more curved shape of the lid of that vessel. It's not quite the lid. And again, I might lift this edge loop up slightly. If I have a look in the perspective viewport, that shape looks quite nice now. So I'm going to start matching the top of the spout to the reference images now, beginning with the chamfer on the edge here. I'm just going to use extrude edge, and swap back to the move tool. Just move it straight up, and it looks like I can snap it to the grid there. Now the scale tool for components is still snapped down to the origin, so I'm going to bring it up while I work on the tip of the spout here. Holding down Control again on the y-axis, I can just scale that in nice and evenly to match the shape. Now, I'm going to bring the top of the neck up. I'm going to extrude. Shift right click for that marking menu. Extrude edge. Holding down V for snap vertex. I'm going to bring that up just underneath. And I'm going to combine these two shapes together. First I'm going to get rid of the construction history on all of these because we don't need it anymore, and I don't want to create any complications. So edit, I can go delete all by type history. I think that'll clean up the whole scene. Quick save. Select these two shapes, mesh combine. I'm going to bridge these edge loops together. So I can double click to select both of those and then just deselect one corresponding edge to make sure that the bridge is performed in the right areas. And if I hit bridge, that should fill in that space nicely, and then I can just use fill hole to close that up. Now this edge here has a bevel on it, So I can just use bevel edge, and in the side view you can see it comes right down. So if I switch over to the attribute editor, use the slider, I'm going to take it off world space. Set it to offset as fraction. I think I can leave world space and then slide that up till 1 and increase the number of segments to create a nice curve there. I think bring it up a little bit, create a bit of a tighter curve along that edge. It's not quite matching up with the reference, but it looks pretty good to me. Clean it up. And we'll just set it back down to 2 segments because I will be softening this. We don't need quite that amount of resolution there. And these empty faces here can be cleaned up if we just assign the default material and it's filled up nicely. I'm going to create the lip here at the top of the jar. So if I extrude the edge and switch back to the scale tool, I can still use the y-axis controller to scale it to, I've got switch to X-ray. I'm not going to be able to see that very well. I'm just going to have to eyeball it. Make it reasonably appropriate size. That looks okay. Extrude again. Just hit the G key. Now I'll use the y-axis without holding down Control to push it down, and then hold down Control again to create a nice chamfer to the edge. That looks okay for the moment. Now I want to merge the rest of the geometry together. So these parts here, I'm going to start with these 2 edges. They're not quite aligned perfectly. So I'm going to take the outside edge, and if I hit insert I can release the scaling pivot from being locked to that point. I just hit the move tool and bring the scale tool back up again to reset it to its default spot. I can bring all those edges in so they line up pretty closely because I don't want to shift that cylinder out too much. That looks pretty good. I'll do the same with this one down here. Now I'll select the vertices in the side view, so I can just use the marquee to select them, and merge the vertices. Nothing happened because the threshold is set a little bit too low. So if I go to the channel box, go merge vert and set this distance up, and 1 centimeter I think would be fine. Just check that all of those vertices have been merged along there. I could have done both of those edges in the same operation, but I'll just repeat the merge vertice. That looks like it's working nicely. I'm going to attach the neck to the body, combine, select those vertices, merge vertices, and in the attribute editor or the channel box set the distance. Now let's have a quick look to make sure that that worked okay. a bit too high. Let's grab those sets of vertices there that are a bit too close. I'm going to just drop it back down, and it looks like 0.5 works nicely. So the next thing I want to do is cover up the base underneath. I'm going to turn off the reference plane so I can see it. I'm going to hide this guide shape because I don't need it for the moment. And I'm just going to use fill hole to create a single polygon face that sits in there. And then go to the interactive split tool. And I'm going to create a radial cut across this face, and it should exactly meet in the center, and that looks like it's working pretty well. Yeah, it is. I'll quickly make sure it's set right to the scene origin. Looks like it is. Okay. Now I don't want the base to be a big pole. I'm going to go back into the interactive split tool. And that just gives me the option to take out these edges, leaving 4 quads. So just with the scale tool, moving the pivot to the central vertex there, which is snapped to the scene origin, and I'll just scale it up. Let's try that. So now I'm just going to go to the interactive split again. How many do I have? I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I go to the tool settings, I can set the snap magnets to 4. And then you can see I can just click in a continuous series. And right click to finish it. If I didn't do all of those cuts in one operation, each time it would readjust the snap magnets, so I wouldn't have the cuts evenly distributed along this edge here. I'm going to repeat it for each of these sections as well. I can just cut straight across. Okay. Now, I'm going to take each of these uncut faces here. Just check I've only got them selected. I'm just going to delete them, because instead of cutting them all individually, I'm just going to bridge these edge loops, these border edges, which will automatically do it for me. Now that's left me with quite a rigid shape in the middle here. Select all the faces. And if I hold down Control I can I want to shrink the selection first, and then go to vertices. Holding down Shift and right click, I can go to average vertices, and just repeat that a couple of times. That'll just smooth it out slightly. I just want to make sure that this vertex is still snapped perfectly to the scene. So the next thing I want to do is start modeling these handles. So I'm going to start over here on this side. I'll just select a face to show me where I am. So over here on the front view, I'll go into object mode and I'm going to create a cube. I'll bring the cube up and line it up as close as I can with this handle. I'm going to bring it roughly to the center and scale it so it fits into the vertical section before it starts changing into these curved areas. Now I can snap these vertices to the grid here. I'm going to take these outside vertices and I'm going to snap them using snap to vertex to the outside edge. I want it to be quite a flat, wide handle, so I'm going to scale it out reasonably wide. That looks okay. Maybe a bit thinner. Have a look from the top view. Okay. And I'm going to add an edge loop around here so that I can make this inside edge taper in. I'll harden those edges so I can see where they are running. Okay, so now I want to duplicate that polygon shape, rotate it around, and I'm going to line it up with the top. I think right here along this grid line is where the form stops being a curve, so I can align it to the grid there and bring this edge in so it just about touches. I don't need it to touch perfectly yet. So I want to create this sweeping curve. I'm going to do that using the bridge tool. I'm going to merge, combine these shapes together, mesh combine. And I can select these two sets of faces. And if I go to edit mesh bridge and bring up the options, I can set it to smooth path. By default it's set to linear path. I'm just going to hit apply and see what happens. Now there's not quite enough divisions here, so I'm going to undo that, set the divisions up a couple, hit apply again, and you can see we're left with quite a nice curve. Have a quick look in the side view. I think the top of this curve here needs to come down a little bit, so I'm just going to undo that, drop it down, maybe even to that grid point, and then I select those faces again, hit bridge. Looks like it's going to work quite nicely. So the next thing I want to do is create this tapering down to the horizontal attachment. So I'm going to start by just extruding this one face here underneath that curve of the handle down to meet with the geometry. So just extrude, set the move tool, and I can vertex snap to the rim here. Have a look. Okay, now I'm going to add an edge loop using the insert edge loop tool. Make sure it's set to multiple edge loops and one edge loop. That'll create one right in the middle. And snap it to the grid. And then I'm going to grab this face on the inside of the handle here, extrude it, move tool, and move it in until it probably right up to this edge here. If I turn on wireframe on shaded, I can see a vertex here I can snap to. That looks okay to me. Okay, now I'm going to delete these inside faces. So I can focus on this narrower edge, this narrower edge ring on the inside of the handle. I'm going to extrude just that edge, move it down, and by eye just line it up with that curve. I can use vertex snap to bring it right down to the base there. Let's have a look at that. Okay, that's looking okay. I want to drop these down a little bit, just to make room for the taper to go over the top. I'm going to take this edge again and bring it across until it meets the top of the jar. I might even bring it up, right up into this corner, and lift it up a little bit. That looks okay. And I can lift this up so it's a bit more horizontal. Just a tiny bit. So I want to create some more edge loops in here so I can bridge the gap. I can just use the insert edge loop tool, and I'll use the scale tool. Holding down J, I can scale the y-axis so it snaps to 0. And then switching to the move tool, just vertex snap it back up to where these edges cut that curve. I might bring that down to the bottom one first, so I can insert another edge loop and it will be perfectly straight. So go back to bridge. You can get it in the shift clicking right click menu. I'm going to drop those divisions back down to 0 and just hit bridge and G to repeat. Now for this transition here from the vertical stem, the vertical part of the handle, to the horizontal flange, I want to create some edge loops that cut across here vertically so that we can bend it around and start adding some resolution along here. So I'm just going to use insert edge loop tool like that. And I'll add another edge loop along there as well. And I can bring it back, line it up with that. And in the front view, check that I'm not breaking that curve too much. like a little bit of a curve will look nice there. And I can just repeat the bridge operation. Now, I want to add in one more edge loop. I'll use interactive split tool so that I can add it in along here. And front view, just keep that curve nice and even. And then bridge tool in the marking menu, shift right click bridge, and select a couple of edges on those remaining triangular holes, and just go fill hole. Now I can select these edges that bisect that face that should be a quad, and just go delete edge. Now this angle here, this sharp 90-degree angle, is not something that I want. I want it to be more curved. So I'm going to grab the bottom two vertices of that, both of those, sorry, I missed that selection. Then in the front view, bring that curve back in. I quite like how it flares out a little bit there. I can bring that edge down. Okay, that looks quite nice. Now I can start thinking about how this shape is going to join in with the rest of the mesh of the Amphora. So let's have a look. There's a edge that bisects it, so I can use the insert edge loop tool to bisect the handle as well. And I want to create a little bit of a curve to match what I have here. So I'm just going to grab those two edges that run along the ridge there, and bring them in a little bit on the x-axis so they line up a bit more. Not quite that much. I'm going to take the ones at the top here, bring them back a little bit, but drop them down also. It's okay to be a bit messy. Also want this attachment to taper a little bit. I just want to grab those vertices at the end of that extruded face and bring them down so they match up a little bit more nicely with this inside portion of the neck here. We can see in the reference image that this lines up pretty evenly with this rim. So I'm going to take the bottom of the handle here and just vertex snap it up so it aligns with the underside of the rim as well. Just go in and even some of this stuff up a little bit more. That looks okay. Quick save. I'm going to cut across this extruded section. So I'm going to take these edges and bridge them. The next thing I want to do is add in another edge that bisects that a little bit. So I'll use edge loop for that one. You can also bulge a little bit. Now if we lift this up, we may be able to create, actually, rather than a triangle, a bit of a join along here, straight into the neck. So I'm going to quickly turn on wireframe, X-ray, sorry. And I can see this box down here is pretty useless at the moment for what we want. So I'm going to create a new edge ring that runs around here, just using the extrude tool and then the move tool to push it back down. I can get rid of these faces on the underside of the handle here and bring these vertices up in line with the geometry of the jar. Bring that in. Now I'm going to switch back to wireframe just to grab these vertices here, do a quick merge and just tie those parts of the edge ring back together. Okay, I'm going to grab these vertices here and bring them straight over to meet with the jar. I'm going to have a look at the underside of this ridge here. Now, I want to create a copy of this jar before we do anything drastic to it. So I'll just hit duplicate, move it back off behind so we know that we're not using it. I can hide it for the time being. That's just a contingency if anything goes wrong. Another quick save, and I can start messing around with the geometry here. Now I'm going to create an opening for the end of this handle to seam up to. So I'll just delete those 4 faces across the edge there. And then using the move tool I can vertex snap these components nice and cleanly to that edge there. I'm going to do the same for this top part as well. I'm going to create a bit more geometry in here using the interactive split tool. I'm just going to create a line that runs across the top. Missed that last bit. So we can drop these edges down a little bit. I'm going to extrude out of here. So that we've got some more geometry to work with. I just want to close up this opening here for a moment, so I'll delete these, leave some triangular faces, and just like those 2 vertices, and delete them. We can create some quads running along the bottom there. This edge is in the wrong place. Let's try that selection again. And just use the bridge tool to close up that hole. and the interactive split tool to create those quads. We want to create an edge loop that runs around the neck of the jar here. So we can just add an edge loop in with the insert edge loop tool, move it down, use vertex snap to line it up with that handle piece. Then we can individually snap those vertices to their corresponding vertices on the neck. I'm going to give this part a little bit more room. So raise it up off that jar a little bit so we've got some geometry running along there. And push it back so it's closer to this seam here, this edge loop. Just try and keep the curves going a little bit cleaner, tapering in towards the neck. I'm actually going to delete this edge ring here, this edge loop, sorry. So control right click edge loop utilities and then edge loop and delete, and that'll get rid of the geometry there, so we can match it up to the top surface of the body of the jar. I'm just going into wireframe mode, and vertex snap these two vertices either side of the handle to those corresponding vertices on top of the jar there. Same with the ends. Switch back into shaded mode to clean up the flow a little bit and bring the top ones back as well. Make sure it's nice and clean. That could go back a little bit more. Now we want to keep the same width at the base here, so we're going to take these vertices, instead of snapping them to the points here where they're tapering, we'll just raise them up. I'll do them both at the same time. Then we can vertex snap those axes to make sure they're sort of aligned in the right basic positions. We'll do the same for these two. Up in the Y and across with the X. Quick save. Okay, so now we're going to grab the vertices on the top of the jar, on the body of the vessel, and snap them back to vertices on the handle. Now having a quick look, it doesn't look like it's broken up the shape of the lid too much. We can do the same for this one. Bring it across. And this last one here as well. Just turn off the reference plane so we can see. So there isn't too drastic a change in topology. I'm just going to taper these vertices a little bit. The same with these edge ones. Bring them in just a tiny bit and push them out so they match that curve, and clean up the flow radiating back towards the neck there. Push them forwards a bit so we don't disturb the curve. Grab these ones a little tiny bit too. That looks pretty good to me. And finally we want to create another edge loop along here. Pop it in there. And do a vertex snap to close up the handle. Okay, so that's what the handle looks like. Quick save. Just quickly go Alt-H with the body selected, and we can start selecting some of these internal faces. These are the faces that are going to be hidden by the handle, obviously, so we can just delete them. Control-Shift-H to bring back last hidden. I'll just make a duplicate of the handle in case we need that geometry separated again. Shift, hold down right click for the marking menu, go combine. In vertex mode, select the vertices, merge vertices. Because they're snapped to each other, they should merge very cleanly. And just quickly check by selecting a couple. They look okay. Now, this taper in here can be pushed out a little bit so it doesn't disappear into a really sharp edge. A little bit more. And I'll push it back to match the curve. I might pull that up a little bit as well. So that handle's looking really nice. And we can bring these edges right back into the neck, into the rim, the top as well. And maybe add a little bit of taper. That should be okay. So one quick step is just to go into the normals in the polygon menu and conform normals, just to make all of those shapes face the same direction. Now we can grab that bisecting edge and the same over here. That's not quite right. That one. And we can detach components along that edge. So now if we go separate in the shift click marking menu, we end up with the section just with the handle and the sections that we haven't modeled yet. We can just delete those sections. Take the handle, duplicate it, rotate it about the origin 120 degrees, 240. I did the negatives. Combine, grab the vertices, they look like they line up okay, merge vertices. It all seems to be one surface. Quickly test. They don't separate. And edit, delete by type, history. Now, might be a good idea to get rid of these hard edges so we can see the forms a little better. I'll just go to soften, harden edge and soften, harden. So the next thing I want to do is add in some bevels along the edges so that they're supported when we subdivide, and so that the smooth mesh preview catches the light in a way that we are expecting. It looks realistic. And that'll show up in the Mudbox sculpt as well. So I'll just quickly grab the curves so I can select everything, shift click to get rid of the polygon mesh. Do the same for the bottom. We'll add them to a new construction layer. And I'll hide that layer so that gets them out of the way. And I'll do the same for the handle. Add selected objects to the layer. I'll just bring up the outliner and have a look for that hidden object as well. So that would be Shift H to unhide. That one can go in the construction layer as well. Add selected objects, and that one can too. Turn off the layer. So what we want to do is start adding in the beveled edges. So we'll start off with these top two edges that we want to be quite sharp, and we only want them to have one tight bevel, just so the edges are supported. For the sculpt, that looks pretty good, and we'll do the same for the bottom. Nice and easy to do. And this one we'll leave a little bit looser. So that the curve around the edge when it's subdivided is a little bit softer as well. Delete the history. Just quickly merge all the vertices together. That should get rid of any overlapping ones. And clean up the mesh. Clean up. So let's try that again. Everything's still selected. Working a little bit nicer this time. We've got a couple of errors around the top here. We can fix them up in a second. We just want to tighten that bevel a little bit. We can grab it in the attribute editor. Something like that. So, along here, we want to use the bevel tool again. So we'll grab these edges that were missed in the bevel. And grab these extra edges that we don't want. And delete edge. Shift right click marking menu, delete edge. If you wanted to save some time, you could add in the bevels before you rotate the handles around, but it's quick enough doing it this way, so I'll carry on regardless. And for these faces here, just want to created a few errors, so we'll select them and delete them so we can clean them up nicely. Just these small triangular faces. Let's have a look what's going on here. Okay. So let's clean these up by deleting these faces as well, so we can just use the bridge tool. Forgot to delete the faces on the end of those handles. That's what's causing the errors. I'm just going to use the merge vertex tool, and in the tool settings you see I've got merge to target vertex, so I can click and drag from these corners and snap them up nice and quickly. And I can just select the edges around this opening, and they can be closed up just using the bridge tool. Just hit G to repeat that last action. So I can have a look at what these bevels are actually doing. It might show me any errors as well, just by hitting 3 on the keyboard. I can see down here we're having some errors with mesh, and again it's because the faces along there weren't deleted prior to the world, the vertex merge that we did. There we go. Geometry's looking much nicer there. Press 1 again. Now I can get a nice clean bevel, tighten it right up so there's a nice sharp edge along there. Now it's getting quite dense in terms of geometry down in this seam here, so I'm going to try and figure out how I can reduce that. I'm going to start by adding an extra edge loop, just with the edge loop tool. I'm going to drop it down. It's got a bit of a curve there. I want it to bulge out, so I'm going to use the scale tool to accentuate that curve a little bit. Now what this gives me is a little bit of geometry that I can use to get rid of some of these edge loops along here. So instead of running the geometry along that way to join each other up, I'm going to run it up the neck where we've got more resolution. Just retopologizing a little bit. I'm going to use the interactive split tool to do this. So what I want to do is I want to take this edge here and bring it up to there. I'm going to start by deleting the edges that I don't want. So delete edge, interactive split tool. Now that geometry is running up the length of that neck rather than around the neck, creating extra edge loops that we didn't need. And so now we're left with triangle face here. We can just take these and they can be deleted as well, leaving us with quads here. I'm just going to lift these edges as well, just to even out the geometry. We're just going to use an insert edge loop tool, this time set to relative distance, and I'm going to make sure that insert with edge flow is off, so I don't change the height at all. I just add in another edge, and I'm going to bring it up here about equal distance. That's going to create a supporting edge so that when this is subdivided, I'll hit 3 to show you, there's a nice curve in there. So this is looking okay, but I want to support the edges along here as well. So I'm going to bevel in here, selecting those edges. And this I want to be very tight. To give a nice sharp transition between the handle and the rest of the container. I got to zoom in close and select this edge that's been created as a result of that bevel. Okay, now I can just hit delete edge in the shift click marking menu. I'm going to set the snap magnets back to 3 so that I can grab the center. Here, bridge, and bring that out in line with that, especially that vertex. And that looks nice and clean for the moment, except for the hard edges there. And I'm going to do the same for this one over here. Okay, and I have to clean it up at the other end as well. Now I can insert an edge loop along here. And just close it up. Just quickly save and press 3. We can have a look to see if we have any errors, and we do. So the vertex wasn't merged, and we've got an extra vertex here that we can get rid of. And turn on wireframe on shaded so we can see the edge flow. We've got some triangles here that we can get rid of, so we'll just select these edges underneath, and with them all selected we'll go to the marking menu, the shift click marking menu, merge collapse edge, and that'll clean them up nicely. So just looking around, having a look for there's a couple more. I'm just going to collapse them, leaving the nice clean edge flow. Cutting in using the split polygon tool, interactive split tool, exactly where I want this edge to run. So I want it to go about like that. Maybe have it come in from the sides. So now we're left with a triangle here. So this edge can be deleted. I'll just repeat that step. Grab those edges, that can just be deleted, and these ones here, and finally these extra edge loops that are no longer needed, they can be deleted as well, just using delete edge. And I want to bring these edges in between the handle joints. I'm going to bring them down. Now I might actually be able to think about reducing the geometry of the neck, because it's quite dense geometry around there compared to the rest of the mesh as well. I can start with this inside edge here that we don't need anymore. Bring them down to here. We'll try deleting them. Have a look. I'm going to bring this down a little bit. I'm going to do the same thing for both of those and then clean up this area here. I'm going to loop them over like I've done with this. Yep. And then I'm going to insert an edge loop. I'll use this area up here so I can just drag that down to approximately where I want to create these, just above where I want to create these new topology flows. And I can just use the interactive split tool to create that geometry that runs across the top. The reason I brought that edge loop down is so that when I collapse these edges on the triangular faces, these structures here keep the form of the neck a little bit better than they would otherwise. Let's start just by collapsing these. Collapse edge. And I want to bring this vertex here, bring them all up in line with that, working around the neck here, so when we sculpt in Modbox we've got more evenly distributed faces, and underneath has a bit too much geometry as well. We're probably not going to sculpt there very much, maybe a little bit, but we don't need as many edges as we have, so if we can get rid of whatever we can, I'm just going to select the edges here that create these triangles, and I'm just going to go delete edge, and we're left with these quads here. Now I want to even up this a little bit, so I'm going to grab this center vertex again, hit B for soft selection, and I'm with the middle mouse button going to drag to set the fall off so that it just includes that cluster, but none of the edges. I don't want to change the edge at all. Switch back to the scale tool and just bulge them out a little bit. Now if I press B again, that'll get rid of soft selection. And I want to grab that. Looks like a pretty good selection. I'll just go to vertices, and then I can average the vertices out a little bit just to smooth everything. Grab the center one, grow it again, and do the same average vertices. Yeah, that looks much nicer. Still a lot of geometry down there, but it's okay for now. Quickly save, and I'm going to go to the shift click marking menu and soften harden edge, and I'm going to soften all edges. Just set it to a smooth shade. Now there's a couple of edges here that can also be deleted. And that's looking pretty good. That's going to smooth nicely for Mudbox, and we're going to be able to sculpt some nice detail on that.